Welcome to the MasterYourMix podcast, helping engineers, producers, and artists create professional recordings and mixes, even from home. I'm your host, Mike and Davina. Let's get started. Hey, welcome to the MasterYourMix podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me today. My name is Mike and Davina, and I'm super excited for this episode. This is a bit of a different one than normal. Normally, we talk a lot about music, but today we're going to be talking about audio for video games, and we're going to be talking about sound design. And I know that this is a topic that we haven't talked about on the show before, and today my guest is Jim Diaz. Jim is an audio engineer, a sound designer. He's worked for companies like LucasArts, Electronic Arts, Sony, Disney, and so many more. And he just has so much experience in this industry and is working on amazing stuff. And in this interview, we get into a lot of really cool conversation about the process of making sound effects for video games or making music for video games and how that all works and how it all comes together. And I just thought this was such an interesting chat, and I know you're going to love this episode. And it's funny, I actually first met Jim because he is a student of mine. He actually signed up for one of my coaching programs. And so I didn't know about all of this amazing stuff he had been working on until we first started chatting. And once I found out about this, I knew I had to get him on the podcast because he's just working on so much cool stuff. And it's such a fascinating world that we haven't talked about on this podcast before. So I know you're going to love this. I know you're going to find it super interesting. So this is my interview with Jim Diaz. Jim Diaz, thank you so much for being on the MasterYourMix podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing all right. Good to see you. Good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Anytime, man. For people who might not know your background, can you give us that story on how you got into music and ultimately to where you are today, where you're working on video games and spatial audio and a whole bunch of amazing cool stuff?
Right on. Yeah. Well, I started life as a musician. My dad was in a band. He gigged around L.A. In the late 60s when I was born. And so I kind of came out playing. My aunt used to tell a story about my pregnant mother with me going to see my dad's band play, and my mom grabs my aunt's hand and puts it on her stomach, and I was kicking in time to the band. So that was kind of like my first musical performance, I guess. But yeah, so actually when I was 6, I had a dream about being a bass guitarist. And so my parents hooked me up with guitar lessons, and I started taking lessons from the guy who taught my dad how to play. But at 6, it was a little bit over my head, and I was pounding on everything, like my body and just, coffee cans with the plastic lids, whatever I could pound on. And it was like, okay, he's a drummer. So, so my 10th birthday, I got a nice Ludwig kit for my 10th birthday, and everything was, all bets were off. But I had to take lessons, so they hooked me up with a teacher, and I was doing school stuff. And so I was doing school competitions. So when I was 11 years old, I started winning awards for things like solo snare performance and that kind of stuff. And then I got into marching band, and we marched all over Northern California, and I did that for a while. And I got tired of doing the whole school thing, and wanted to be a rock star. So I devoted my teens and 20s to trying to do that to no avail. I'd be in a cover band, and then that would fall apart, and then I'd go, be in an original band, and we'd do a demo, and then that would implode, and I'd go back to cover band, and did that ad nauseum until I was in my late 20s, and I was like, okay, this is definitely not happening now. So I went to school at the Academy of Art in San Francisco and started studying. I wanted to make movies and do like sound for film and that kind of stuff. And so that was what my goal was at school. And while I was there, some of the students I was enrolled with were talking about working in video games. And it was like, oh, similar discipline, steady your paycheck kind of thing. And that resonated with me because my dad, we're originally from LA area, and my dad has some cousins that work in the film industry. And my grandfather actually was an electrician in film and television. And so my cousin at a family gathering was saying, oh, he was a grip. And he's like, well, if I'm working on a commercial, I'm always on the phone lining up the next job. But if I'm working on a film or something, I know I'm working for at least, 3 months to 6 months. And so, that kind of resonated with me when they said, oh, similar discipline, but steadier paycheck. And around that time, a really good friend of mine gave me a copy of a game from LucasArts, George Lucas's company, and it was called Dark Forces 2 Jedi Knight. It was a PC game, and I got that thing, and I just played the hell out of it. I just, I loved it. It was 3D. It was Star Wars. It was, it had live action cutscenes. It was a really, really cool game, and I thought to myself, I'd like to do this. I'd like to work for a company like this. I said, I'd like to work for this company. And so that same friend, a few months later, he actually found a link to the LucasArts website, and they had, like jobs available and stuff. And he sent me this, oh, it's for hint line. I don't know what that means, but hint line was essentially, you play the game and you get stuck and you need a clue to, so you call somebody on the phone and they would answer. And it was, some of it was pre-recorded, but some of it you actually talk to somebody live. Anyway, so I applied for that job. I was in the running, but apparently that went to somebody internally, and so I didn't get looked at for that job. I didn't get hired. A few months later, a job for a QA technician, quality assurance, came open where, it was basically a tester. You play the games and so I reapplied. They remembered me and they said, oh yeah, we'll bring you in. And so that's when I started, in my illustrious video game career. So that was
that's amazing.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was, but my goal was to get into the sound department. And so I was in the test department for about 3 years, and I was testing all kinds of different types of games, PC, console. At one point, I moved into what we call compatibility, where we were in a designated lab where I was actually building computers and testing our games in different operating systems, using different video cards, different sound cards, different motherboards, that kind of thing. And, so that was kind of different because, I wasn't just playing the game to break the game, which is something that I did when I was in, fully in test, but I became what was known as a breaker, because I would go from team to team, and then I would just okay, find the holes here, and then bang, it's broken. Okay, fix it.
Were you a big gamer before you got that job?
I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and so I go back to Pong, right? My first video game system was Pong, Super Pong 4, and that was a lot of fun. And we had the first couple of Atari systems, and then I got out of it. I became a teenager, it got me interested in being in bands and driving and stuff, and so we would go to we had video game parlors in our area. So it was like a place where you could just go, and they had, tons and tons of stand-up games and stuff. And so I did a lot of that. But it wasn't until my friend gave me that PC game, because I was getting into PC games, in the mid 90s, because it was kind of interesting, and it was a different way. It was like a higher end versions of video games. And so that really appealed to me. And the fact that it was PCs and you could, I could build it myself or upgrade it myself, and get the latest, greatest video card, and get the highest resolution possible, and doing all that kind of stuff. So I was really into the PC thing, especially when I started working in games.
Yeah, those games have definitely come a long way since Pong.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. And so I've kind of been around video games my whole life in some degree, and then became my job in 1999. So, and that was great. I mean, it was a great experience just working for LucasArts in general. But yeah, I spent the certain amount of time, and then a job came open in the sound department, and I applied, and nobody looked at me. And another one a couple years later, another one, and nobody looked at me. So finally, one day, one of my managers went to the head of the audio department and says, "What does this guy got to do to get into your department?" And apparently, there was some guy who had tried to go from QA into audio, and he did not do the best job, and he was caught sleeping in his office occasionally, and just had a bad vibe. So he was let go. So they were kind of weary about trying somebody else from test. But, luckily I had a good manager who stood up for me and said, "Hey, what can we do for this guy?" And so what ended up happening is one day a week, I was allowed to work in the audio department as a sound librarian. And so that was kind of like my introduction into that. And so basically I literally converted the LucasArts Sound Library from what it had been, which was like a FileMaker Pro kind of interface and database. And then that was about the time when things like SoundMiner and NetMix and all these third-party library solutions were coming online, and so we hooked up with SoundMiner and we hooked up with NetMix, and we ended up going with NetMix because they were local. They were in Alameda, and we were in Marin County, and that was my first foray into doing audio professionally in any capacity, and
that's a big job too, because I remember with my own experience working in audio post-production, when I first started, everything was the FileMaker Pro thing, and
right.
Every library had its own FileMaker Pro system, so you had to go through and try to find everything. And then I remember when I got a job working for a company in Toronto, we had an affiliation with Sound Dogs. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but
yeah.
But yeah, they were all using what's it called? You just mentioned it.
SoundMiner?
SoundMiner, yeah. They were using SoundMiner, and when I first saw that, I was like, oh wow, this is so much better than everything I've ever seen.
yeah, and they're in Canada somewhere, and
they're in Toronto.
yeah, they're still going strong, and I use their stuff, and but it was kind of funny that everything was so new back then. We were asking for special features, and and so one of the reasons we ended up going with NetMix, which is really not really doing anything anymore. I don't think they're creative network design anyway. So we've got a list of functions we'd like to see in your software, and SoundMiner came back and said, oh, here's why you don't want those, and the next iteration of NetMix had those features added to it. So we're like, okay, we're going to go with this guy because he like totally responds to us. And he was a real good guy too. And we lost contact a few years ago, but anyway, so yeah, it was converting all that stuff. We came up with a new naming convention for all the files, and this was back in like OS 9. So, we had character limitations that we had to hold to. Now you can pretty much have any name you want, and it could go on for however many characters you can think of. Maybe 64, but at this time it was like limited to 16. So we had to be very concise so that if the software was down or the server was down, you could still at least look at the library and go, oh, I know what this is. Or, when we had category folders and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So that was it was good because it was tedious, but it was, I can handle that kind of stuff. I like, the little minutia of how things, organizational things. And so it was kind of right up my alley. And yeah, the FileMaker thing was kind of interesting because we had 4 different interfaces, and we had several steps. So it was like raw, and then prepped, and then cooked and served, right? So, the raw was like straight data coming off of, either commercial libraries, or we would occasionally get stuff from Skywalker Sound. And, so that stuff would become in a raw form, and then we would cut it up to make it game ready. And that was kind of like the prepped, and then, we'd like normalize it and do all kinds of whatever else. And then when we actually put it in the actual library part, then it was served. And so, yeah, that was using FileMaker Pro and Apple scripts. And wow. Larry Oppenheimer, Larry the O, he's kind of some people may know him or not. His brother was the editor for Mix for a while, an electronic musician. And so Larry used to have a page on the last page of electronic musician called the final page or something like that, final statement or whatever. And it was him. And literally the day before I started at LucasArts, I happened to read that article for the first time. And I'm like, oh my God, this guy works at LucasArts. I'm going to start there tomorrow. And I went to the kitchen to go grab a drink, and sure enough, here comes Larry, and he was coming to make himself some coffee. I said, oh, you're Larry the sound guy. And he's like, yes, I am. So that was my first introduction to Larry. He's a really great guy, and he was one of my main mentors when I was there. So as time went on, they had an opening for an administrative position in the sound department. And that was when I was doing the 1 day a week kind of internship. And so I applied for that, and it ended up going to somebody who actually had administrative positions, but I wanted to get in, and just learn and be around a professional facility and understand how things worked. And so anyway, so that we did the sound library thing. And then one of my colleagues, Nick Peck, who now works for Disney, he is the head of Disney Worldwide Publishing Audio. And yeah, and so he came in as a supervisor there, and he started teaching a class at a local community college on Pro Tools. And so it was suggested that I take this Pro Tools class to get my chops up. And I'd been working in Cubase and stuff at the time, and at the Academy of Art I took a Pro Tools class. And then so Nick started teaching this class at Diablo Valley College out near me, where I live in the Bay Area, and like 3 weeks into that class, he went to our boss and he goes, we got to get this guy in production like right now. And I'm like, wow, that was pretty cool. He did.
That's very cool.
Yeah. And so my first game was called Armed and Dangerous, and it was an Xbox game. I think it went out on PS2 as well. But yeah, so that was my first, and I did probably half the sounds in that game. And, it was my first real big, I was so happy to be doing the work, and it was pretty primitive at the time. We didn't have any sophisticated game engines or anything like that. It was pretty much creating content and then throwing it over a fence for somebody else to hook up and implement. And we did a lot of pre-production, so all the levels were kind of done beforehand. And techniques changed as time went on, but at that time, that's the way we did it. And and so it was a very cool experience. And when you see your name, and you're playing a game that you've made, there's nothing like that. It's a very fulfilling kind of experience.
I bet. That's crazy. So like when it comes to making music for video games, like what goes into it? Because I feel like it's this kind of this mysterious art that I think people are familiar with. Like, most of the people that listen to this are obviously like music people, and they're very familiar with that world. And even sound for film and television, I'm sure people understand that to some degree. But when it comes to video games, it seems to be a little bit more like mysterious. At least to me, I feel that way. Like there seems to be so many elements that go into it, and then I think when you combine that with like the programming side of it and all that, it seems very complex.
Yeah, well, the programming side is one thing, and there's a whole team of people usually working on that kind of stuff. And again, when I first started, there was no third party tools like Unreal or say Fmod or WYSE in terms of game engine software. They just didn't exist, and so everything was kind of done from scratch, as a whole package. So yeah, and my specialty was sound effects, and so I did do some music recording and some editing stuff. So basically, in the context of a game, there's usually a composer. Who and at LucasArts we had a staff. We had several staff composers. We had a bunch of sound designers, and people who specialized in dialogue. So we all kind of had our kind of specialty but we all most of us were musicians, and so if there was something where we needed to do a pop style recording or whatever, one of us, I'd usually be the drummer, and we'd have a guy who would play keyboards, and some guys bring in session guys for horns or whatever, and so, but generally it starts with the composer, and then the composer works with the story crew, and they kind of map out how things are going to work, and sound design work kind of together with game, and as things got more interactive, we could do really cool things like having different cues for different areas. And so if you had a path that was going to be an easier path, or a path that was going to go into battle, the music would be different depending on which way you went, and that kind of stuff. But the composers would write things in chunks, in cues, and in some cases they would record live orchestras or live musicians, or sometimes they would do a hybrid of MIDI instruments and live musicians, depending on what the project called for, what the budget allowed for, that kind of stuff. And then, as things got more sophisticated, they could do really cool stuff where you could do things according to BPM, and you could have multiple stems playing alongside each other. Some would be faded down, some would be faded up, and then depending on whatever the game situation would be, those faders could be we'd have snapshots of mix levels and things, and so you could change your snapshot depending on whatever the gameplay required, and so you could move in and out these different states of music and how they would play back, and the same thing for sound effects and sound audio. So like we used to do really basic ambience, for environments kind of stuff, and it would be very simple, like quad surround kind of ambient loops that would play, and then occasionally we'd have a random Oneshot or something that would play, like a bird call or whatever, a flyby or whatever. And now we, things are so sophisticated, we can have like really, really intricate systems, like weather systems where it's going to start to rain, and you have different levels of rain that come in and out. Or, if you've got a vehicle and it's suddenly rainy or snowy, the tires will play, based upon whatever texture that, is being triggered. So, it's a snow. So you hear the snow and the tires in the snow, and we could be, and it could totally be, it's literally a CC event, control, continuous control kind of thing. So depending on whatever the gameplay implies, is that what will happen. So yeah, one of the games I was working on in the last few years was called Days Gone. It was a PlayStation 4 game, and that took place in Oregon, and there was lots of rain, lots of snow. And so the textures would change according to whatever your vehicle or your character was walking or riding on, and so those things could change at will. You can have a little puddle and all that kind of stuff, and you get really, really sophisticated. Have multi-tiered sounds for like waterfalls or moving water or any kind. It get really, really sophisticated. And even in terms of the game engine we were using for the audio engine we were using for that game was the Sony Scream engine, and that allowed us really cool things to do. So we had like 4 active reverbs at a time. So if you go into your outdoor reverb is one thing, and then you go inside a building, and then you're in the living room, that's the living room, and then you could nest all these things in together so that if you're in the bathroom and you shoot a gun, it sounds like you're in a bathroom. That kind of stuff. So it could it's gone from very simplistic and very crude to very sophisticated and very kind of very open and fluid.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah, like as you're talking about all of this stuff, my mind's just racing with like thinking about all of the possibilities that could happen and how you prepare for all of that.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, like, obviously there's the dialogue that happens in the games, there's the music, and like you said, there's composers that are writing stuff, and then there's the sound effects and all that ambience, all that kind of stuff. Like there's so many situations that people could experience inside of a game. And I imagine that, you said that people write in cues. They're not writing full songs when they're arranging like compositions and that kind of thing.
Right.
So a cue is like generally like how long would a cue generally be like?
Depends. It really depends. I mean, it could be anything from a stinger, where, you have a significant event that occurs and you need that one stinger, but it'll, the bed will still continue to play, or it could be based upon an area. And okay, well, this area is going to have this music. If you listen, like, especially Star Wars is really great for understanding these kinds of things, because John Williams was tremendous at writing, thematic motifs based on characters. So like Princess Leia has a motif, and Luke has a motif, and Vader has a motif, and then anything associated with the Empire has that one motif, or the Force powers, right? So all and we know these cues because we use them so many times in games, and so we got really familiar with the cues made for film. So it's not that dissimilar from a film composer where, you're writing things according to scenes. It's essentially the same kind of thing, but it's a little bit more sophisticated in the fact that it has to be interactive, and it needs to be, something that gives you the impression of a real living environment. And so when we're thinking, especially in sound design, we don't think of, like if you're working in post-production and you're making a film or television show, that's a very linear kind of media. There's a beginning, a definite middle, a definite end, right? And so, and at, whatever happens in the scene, the villain is about to shoot the hero, and we need a gunshot for that. And they're like, hey, great. They can make the best gunshot for that one thing, but if you go to somebody who works in post-production and, want them to make a gunshot for a video game, and they give you one shot, and it's like, no, man, that's just not going to cut it. We need a group of shots, because and I've recorded weapons for games, and when you fire a gun and you fire it again, the second shot does not sound like the first shot. It's because the air has been displaced in a certain way, and so you get all of these different little factors, and there's subtleties, and so there's tricks that we do in game engines. So like for this Days Gone thing, I did most of the weapons for that game, and so a lot of the weapons sounds were actually not one sound or a mixed sound. It was layers of different frequency bands of a pool of sounds. So you'll have like the action of the hammer hitting the round, the pulling of the trigger part. And then you have what we call the POWs, and so I would break those up into high frequency, mid frequency, and low frequency bands, and then occasionally add like a synthetic thumper to make them really kind of over the top cinematic kind of thing. And so each one of those bands will have a pool of however many sounds, let's say, 5 to 10 sounds. So, and if further stretch out the content, those can be slightly pitched and slightly volumized in such a way that we set a range, it's like, okay, it'll be +1 or -2, a range within there. And the same thing for, like a cent of pitch. So it's really stretching out the content. And, so you're never going to get the same shot twice in a row. Yeah. It's just going to be, and everything's set to randomize and you add, like ricochets, and those will play differently. They'll choose from a pool of sounds that you're triggering depending on the game situation, and just gives you that sense of realism, or, you're buying into the experience. And one thing I always said about doing sound design, especially for games, is, I don't want you to notice what it is that I'm doing. My sounds should be a part of the experience that you're buying into. If I hear something in a game that is just, so over the top, or, takes me out of the experience, it breaks that suspension of disbelief. You really want to kind of just, accept my sounds as reinforcement, and it's informative. I try to, especially with things what we call UI, user, interactive sounds, where you're picking up an item, or you're picking up a power up or something. And part of that sound is not only to let you know you've picked it up, but also to inform you as to what it is. So, if you're picking up like a health bottle of something, you hear the, the cork pull, or whatever, you pick up a piece of paper and it rustles, or whatever it is, whatever is, is a suitable, sound for that particular item. When you pick those things up, you want to make sure that you're informing the player, oh, this is what that is. And so I know that, but again, you're doing it in such a way that it's informative, but you're buying into it as an experience, and you're not really kind of noticing it as a sound.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of like Foley in film, right? It's like,
Yes.
the clothing rustles and that kind of stuff. I'm assuming that there's probably a lot of Foley that goes into this kind of stuff, but
Tons,
it's just
yeah.
more like on an interactive level where
Right.
if I lift my arm this way, I hear a certain sound, or if I go like
exactly. So we'll get like a series of animations for characters, right? And they are actual animations. And the cool thing about working in Unreal is their animation editor is really intuitive and really friendly. And the systems we have, so like for footsteps, we had what we called impact events. And so rather than assigning a specific sound for a footstep, you have footsteps based on whatever texture the character is walking on. So you add the event to the animation, and then the system determines, oh, I'm walking on grass. Does it sound like grass? I'm walking on concrete. Does it sound like concrete? And so it's pulling from a bank of files that we create in the sound engine part, and then that, then the game engine tells it, oh, this is what we're doing there. But like for Foley and stuff, so yeah, if you got an arm swipe, you want a whoosh from this arm swipe, and you want the sound of the whatever fabric or whatever clothing they're wearing and that kind of stuff. And so yeah, we can get really, really detailed in terms of Foley and how things play back based upon whatever the game input is, or whatever, if it's a cutscene or whatever. That's can amazing. Get really, really fine in there. Yeah.
So are you guys generally making these effects or the Foley things, like, is this all done to picture generally, or are you getting like a list of things ahead of time, or
again, it's an evolutionary thing. So yeah, initially it was we'd have animations that we'd have to feed. There would be an animator, and we'd say, okay, attach these sounds to this thing. And then as time went on, it became us doing it. And that was the best part. It's like, if I can go in, I get a video, I put it in Pro Tools, and then I start adding my sounds to whatever it is. Then, I create my sounds there, and then I take those sounds and I put them in the animation editor in Unreal or whatever. So, I mean, yeah, it's a multi-tiered kind of process, but we get, because we can add the sounds to the actual, game elements now. It's great because you can actually, then you render it, you play it back, and you're like, oh, I need to make this adjustment or whatever. So it's a lot more fluid, it's a lot more intricate, and as somebody who makes the sounds, it's much funner, more fun, and you get more of the result that you're trying to design for. So
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I was curious about that. Like, if you would maybe get I was curious about how you guys organized your cue list of like all the things that you needed. Like, I imagine that that would just be like thousands and thousands of pages of cues.
Yes.
And then I was like, oh, I wonder if you like just you take a big chunk of them and then send them off to the game tester, and they're like, oh, there's no audio when I do this, or that kind of thing. But I guess it makes sense if you guys get to do it yourself. And
yeah. Initially, that's the way it would be. It would, or we would play the game, because as the sound designer, you're definitely testing the software as well. So there's a chance for you to see, oh yeah, this is working, this isn't working. And then in the days when I wasn't in control of the volume, I'd have to go sit with like a level designer or somebody and say, okay, let's bump this up, let's bring this back, whatever we needed to do. Some games that I'm known for, I guess, a little bit, are the first two Battlefront games that LucasArts made back in 2004, 2006. And we were partnered with a company called Pandemic Games in Westwood, outside Los Angeles. And so I would actually sit with a guy at his desk who was the level designer. And so all the vehicles in those games, it's like, okay, well, let's turn up the middle band, let's turn up the high end band, whatever, depending on how, we're going to accelerate, we're going to decelerate, we're going to see what, whatever is happening, or, oh, let's test the weapons, whatever the weapons. Is that the right weapon? Yes, that's the right weapon, that kind of stuff. So yeah. And then as things got more sophisticated, then it was me doing it by myself in my edit suite, and just kind of like going, okay, this is the way I want it to sound. And we have all these like test scenarios where there are certain levels where we create where they're strictly just for testing, especially things like distance, so we could, okay, so I'm shooting a user gun, a player gun, and then there's an NPC off in the distance shooting the same gun at me, and I need to create not only the surround version for the player gun, but I need to do what it sounds like when an enemy shoots at you and make sure that sounds right, And so it's we would do things like that. And so there would be like actual, you could see the numbers of how far, and everything was kind of in meters in certain games. So it was like, okay, well, this is like 30 meters away. Okay, this is what it should sound like from there, And usually you're operating under the scenario that if you see it, you hear it, and that kind of stuff.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what does the typical timeline look like for a video game? Because I imagine that when you're recording all of these little samples, they might be a 5-second sample or even a half a second sample, but it doesn't take that long to record it and be done. There's obviously like a lot of work to prep the files and make sure that they're ready for the game and all that kind of stuff. So I imagine that it takes forever to get this stuff done.
It's a process. It takes, and the more sophisticated the game, the longer it takes to develop. A lot of the games that I first started on, they were maybe in development for 2 to 4 years, depending. Now, with games like from Rockstar, they're taking 7 years or more to put out games these days, and they're kind of like the highest level of detail in terms of bang for your buck when it comes to video game design, and like a game like Red Dead Redemption 2 is most likely the most sophisticated video game ever made, and there's so many intricate systems that and they take their time. They make sure the games are in the state they want them to be before they release them. And you don't always have that luxury. I've worked on games that have been tied to films, and you've got that date, and you got to hit that date, and so that's very different than something where you can it's completely for the artistic expression of the design team or the creative team. I mean, I've had games where okay, movie's going to be in the theaters on this date. We need to be in stores 2 weeks before that. And so as that date approaches, depending on how this game can be, features are getting cut, levels are getting cut, and you're just like, oh, we're just wrecking this game, and it's not, it's tough, it depends on whatever the cycle is, the longer your cycle, the more, more room you have to kind of get things together, and these days everything, all the principal casts are usually doing like motion capture. So, all the dialogue is recorded on a soundstage, with people in motion cap suits. And, the first time I did any motion capture work was on a game called The Force Unleashed. It was my last project at LucasArts before I left. And we were doing all the principal cast. We did facial motion capture for them. And so I was recording the dialogue at the same time. And so we had, an array of infrared motion capture cameras that were developed by ILM for their film stuff. So they were just coming off of one of the Pirates of the Caribbean movie, and so they were actually trying to leverage. There was a big synergy at the time between ILM and LucasArts, because we have the real time rendering in the game stuff, and when they would do composites for films, it would take overnight, using everybody, they would tie everybody's machine together, and so everybody's machine, that's even though you're asleep and you're not at work, it's processing composites for some film that somebody's working on. So and so they wanted to leverage some real-time effects to kind of like see a mock-up of what they were doing. And anyway, so they worked with us to get the motion capture going on Force Unleashed. And so yeah, that was great, because we had all the principal cast there, and did everybody, I got to, we had everything all synced up with like a Pro Tools IO box sync. And, so we had the motion capture cameras. We had a video camera for our reference, and then we were recording, in real time. And so all that stuff ended up in the game, and, so that was fun. Yeah.
That's very cool. Yeah. I just imagine that it would I'm just, again, like my brain is just spinning with like thinking about how big these projects are.
Yeah.
Because I remember even just like doing like sound effects and stuff like that for film and television stuff, and like there's a lot of work that goes into that, and what I found in that industry at least was that it seemed like by the time things got to the audio department, budgets had already blown over, timeframes had already blown over. So usually the audio department kind of got screwed, because it was like one of the last steps, and it was like, okay, like this should normally take you a month to do, but can you do it in like 3 days? And
right, right.
And you'd be like, oh shit, like I guess we're not sleeping for the next few days, right?
No, and that's very much the same in video games. They're called video games, not audio games.
Yeah.
So even like Rock Band or Guitar Hero, those are still video games. So unfortunately, audio is kind of like the last thought when it comes to a lot of games, and which was, we tried to do something special at LucasArts. Lucas Company, George was very much about, one of his quotes is, sound is 50% of the movie going experience. And so he really embraced kind of audio, but generally speaking, our footprint on, when we were still, doing, media where we actually put games out on CD or DVD or whatever, we would get maybe a quarter of the data on a DVD or a CD when we were doing game work. So I'm not sure what it is now, because everything's all download. I'm sure, the Rockstar games get, at least that or more, because there's so many things. And that's including using codec. We're talking about not even full res. So my first game, we were actually using 16, 22050 resolution, because it was still half the size of a 16441, right? And so, but now, Sony had their own proprietary codec that we used, and it was really, really good. I can't remember what the codec is it for. And the company I'm working for now, Spatial, we're using an Opus codec, which is OGG Opus, and we're looking into other things. But we're talking about, already data compressed files going down, so they weren't even full waves. Sometimes like music and dialogue are usually streamed in, and by that I mean it's not memory resident. So when we're doing sound effects, those things are like a bank of sounds, and those get loaded into memory when the scene loads or when the game loads. But usually dialogue and music happen on the fly. Same thing with ambient stuff too, because those are being streamed in because they want it real time, and so it also eases up on some processing occasionally. So.
That's crazy. So then, as far as the mix of what you're seeing in a video game and what you're hearing and all those different layers, how does that mix normally get determined? Is that because like you said, if I'm walking closer to a waterfall in the distance or something like that, I'm going to hear that get louder, and that's all dependent on the person and what they're doing, right? So
exactly,
is the mix determined by just relative distance and stuff like that? Is that just all programmed in, or?
It's part of the sound engine. So in the case of Scream, we would have an inner radius and an outer radius, and we could set that to whatever parameter we want. So the guns would be really, really big. The inner radius is the sound at its maximum level, and then the outer radius is the drop off. So from that point of the inner radius to the point of the outer radius would be whatever the distance effect would be applied, and we would have a variety of distance effects that we could choose from, and depending on whatever our desired result would be, and we would could swap those inside the game engine, and then we would render out all the data would get loaded into a bank, and then that bank gets loaded into the game when it launches. So that was how we handled things like that. So basically, you're using the 3D map of the game engine. You're placing, if we would put emitters, along flowing water or something like that, or, whatever you could think of. And so if anything was going to just be static in the world, it was always going to play from that particular place. Then, then we set the radius from that, so okay, here's how far the loudest part's going to be, and here's how far the fallest going to be. And, but everything is based upon a location within the game or a character. So everything is actually tied to the coordinates of whatever item is playing in the space. And then, so the character that you're playing, whether it's a first or a third person, there's usually a virtual microphone behind their head. And so as it approaches anything in the game, that's where the sound is going to kind of play back for the player within the context of their, whether they're on home theater or headphones or whatever.
That's very cool. Yeah. I didn't imagine that it's impossible to have someone mix a video game.
Well, no, and again, we had a virtual mixer in the sound engine, right? So we set levels there, so we ballpark stuff, and then we'll have an actual mix session where somebody will play the full game with the sound engine open, and they're making actual mixer adjustments. And then, like I said, we had snapshots, right? So, okay, for a cutscene it's going to have to sound different because that raging waterfall is going to interfere with the dialogue. And so when the cutscene starts, we switch to a different snapshot, brings the water down, and so it focuses on the dialogue. And then when the cutscene ends, it goes back to the original, baseline mix.
Yeah.
So, that was the cool thing about Scream. Scream was really awesome to work with, and it had a great mixer. Using something like Wise or Fmod is not quite as sophisticated. It's still effective and it works, but it just doesn't have that kind of level of detail that I liked personally using the Sony Scream software.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, I mean, there's just it blows my mind how much preparation has to go into all of this stuff. Because it's very unpredictable. People.
Right.
people might obviously people are supposed to play the game a certain way and go from point A to point B, but some people don't want to go to point B yet. They want to, so it's just planning for all that kind of stuff. And
right. And
being able to
open
adjust.
world games really kind of play that up, in terms of the random nature of things. And, you can do anything in any order you want.
Yeah.
And so, again, the pre-production, your mentality for creating content for that kind of interactivity, it's very different than doing something very linear like post-production stuff. I mean, I've done post-production stuff, but it's, it's like, oh, this is so easy. I don't have to create 10 gunshots for that one.
Those must be dream sessions for you.
Well, it depends on who the crew are, but yeah.
Yeah, I guess so.
But yeah, I mean, nothing against anybody. But yeah, it's when you're making something for, when you're trying to recreate, a realistic or a believable environment, in a type of video game, it's there was a time when you just heard that same footstep over and over and over again. It's like, oh, you just get tired. You get ear fatigued of it, and it takes you out of the experience. Now things are so sophisticated that you can, pretty much do whatever you want to create some sort of scenario that, is the desired result. There's
for sure
no limits to what we can do in terms of.
For sure. It's like, to take it back to like audio for a second, it's like having the same one-shot drum sample, like on every single hit, and then everything just sounds robotic. There's no human feel to it. Like, it's very much than that. It's that kind of concept, but for a much bigger landscape.
I'm a drummer myself, and I recorded an album with a friend of mine, and we were using a Roland kit with like Drums from Hell and some other, other sample kind of thing. And you could tell, man, when you're hearing that snare drum, it's that same snare drum over and over again. It's like, man, that's so annoying. You can't get that nuance or, the feel out of a hi-hat as you can with like a real cymbal, or unless you've got a sound set that has those, different velocity settings or whatever, different, versions of I can get that, that ghost note on that one, one hit, so it's very much in that vein in terms of, trying to emulate something that we know exists already, but it's not really that thing,
For sure. So if someone was looking to get into doing what you do and working in this video game industry and doing sound for that, like, what's the best way to start with that? Because I think there's so many people that are listening to this and thinking like, this sounds awesome. So what now? Do I just like record a bunch of sound effects? Do I like, how do you get into this?
Yeah, it's tough. I get, I was lucky. I kind of backdoored my way in, I saw an idea, so I had an opening and I kind of had a goal. And literally, it's like the first time in my life where it's like, I actually achieved a goal that I set for myself. I was studying to make sound for film, and, video game thing came along. And so, again, a friend of mine who was very influential on my career said, hey, here's a link. And I luckily got the job, and I luckily, got to break into the sound department. I don't know how somebody could do it now. I really don't. I mean, it's difficult. I mean, even there have been times, the mobile thing really hit the video game industry hard. When the iPhones first started coming out, smartphones, a lot of companies were like, what are we doing? How do we, this is a different market than we're used to. And so there was some real, kind of, unsteady times in video game development, in the mid to late 2000s, and it got really dicey. It was difficult for me to get jobs occasionally, but I've been lucky. I've worked for a lot of good companies. I started out LucasArts, went to Activision, went to Sega, worked with Zynga for a little while, Disney, Sony, so I've been at some really, really named places, and unfortunately a lot of times it's somebody rather than your I mean, that's the way it is in music business too. Sometimes it's who it's not necessarily your abilities or whatever. Perseverance is key. You got to be really don't be afraid to try something out. Find somebody, find an indie game. I found some people in England that were making a small Flash game, and I helped them out doing some contract work. Things like Leaked In, or there's a couple Audio Lister or Sound Lister, I think is what it is. They have a lot of video game jobs, or GameSmith. It depends on what the needs are for the game. Usually, I was having a tough time because I was senior. They didn't want to hire any senior people. Then they didn't want to hire any junior people, and I had my choice of a few jobs. So it really depends on what the what the tone of the industry is at a given time, and but again, I got lucky. I mean, I get this, I've been asked this before, and it's like, well, I didn't know anybody, but, I did this thing, and it just kind of happened to work out for me. And, talking with other people was kind of the same thing. One of the guys I worked with at LucasArts actually started out working at Skywalker Sound. And, then a job came open at LucasArts, and he's like, oh, maybe I'd like to do that better. And so he kind of, transferred, and he ended up being a manager at Sony PlayStation for a little while. And now he's actually doing post-production work on some of the Disney shows. I think he did Bad Batch, and I think he worked on Boba Fett and stuff. So
cool.
Again, he's a real kind of go-getter kind of guy, and I'm much more of like, hey, there's a job, I'll try and get that job. So,
but I think you nailed it though. I think persistence is one of those things that in any industry, it's like if you're persistent and you're driven enough to like pursue something to the end, like you'll make it happen. And yeah, it might be a hard industry to get into right now, but even when you were telling your story, you talked about how you applied for jobs that you didn't get. And that happened a few times. And so many people would just be defeated by that and never actually continue to try again.
Right.
And you were like, oh, no, I got to do this. And so, you just put in your time and put in your effort and just kept doing it until eventually it worked out.
Yeah. That was what worked for me. I was driven. I had a goal. I wanted to do it. And that, I somehow, made it happen, to sheer spirit of wanting to do it.
Yeah. And I'm sure that just through maybe name recognition or something like that, the fact that you applied so many times, they're like, oh, we've heard this name before. It sometimes happens, Yeah. I think back to like one of my first jobs growing up. I worked at like McDonald's and stuff like that when I was first starting, but there was a music store in my town, and I always wanted to get a job there. And I was like,
right,
that's the place, right? That's the dream. and it was like a mom and pop shop. And I remember like, there was a point where I just went like every few weeks and would hand in a resume. And like, even though I knew they weren't hiring, and like finally probably like a year and a half later, the owner called me one day and he's like, Mike, I'm sick of you sending resumes. Like, do you want a job? I've got it. Like, take it. Like, fuck, stop sending resumes.
Right.
And it's like, and then in that moment I realized like, okay, persistence is kind of cool. Like,
it is. Yeah. And it will pay off, if you're really passionate about what you do, it comes through. It's real easy to do something you like. It really is. And I love making games. It's just right now I'm not making games. I haven't made a game for a couple years now, but the work is great. The business is not always great. So you've got to kind of it's a line you're walking for sure. And when it's good, it's great. And sometimes it's just not, and but that's life, that's the way it is, and so you roll with the punches. And I was lucky enough that one of the former presidents of LucasArts contacted me for my job that I have now, and he's like, oh, we've been to the same places, we should know each other. And so so I've been with this company Spatial for the past couple of years, and we're doing like a new real-time 3D audio engine kind of technology, and so that's where I'm headed these days.
Very cool. Yeah, that's amazing. And I definitely want to talk about Spatial in a sec. I just want to like kind of wrap up the whole video game industry side of things. And as far as people who are trying to get into this, is it, when it comes to like the sound design thing, is your portfolio as important as it would be for like, music production? Like with music production, okay. So should people be like working on composing their own stuff or like making their own sound effects?
Or go to art schools and see if people are doing animation work, and offer to do sound design for their animations, or somebody making an independent film or something. There's always ways that you can find some work. Or there's a company, or there's a website called Slated, which does kind of film projects and stuff, and they've got a wide variety of jobs there, from super cheap to full on film production kind of level. So yeah, I mean, it's all about, you got to be creative. You got to figure out, how can I put together a portfolio? And doing school projects are all well and good, but once you get something in the marketplace that's making money, then people are going to be more inclined to take a chance with somebody who, okay, well, I've seen you've been here, I've seen this thing or whatever, and we've been hiring people for our company, and this one guy did some, Apple commercials, and so that went a long way. Oh, we'll take a look at that guy. So building a portfolio. My personal website, I've got a variety of work that I've done both in games and post-production. I don't have any music stuff up there, but I intend to get some at some point. But yeah, portfolio is huge. It can be a defining factor for whether or not you get the call for that job or not.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Because and you're always going to be, people are always going to look at your portfolio to determine whether or not you actually know what you're talking about, or if you know how to do it right.
Exactly.
And so if you don't have anything, then you just seem inexperienced, right?
Right. And keep it updated. That's another thing. It's like if you've got some new project, man, you get it in there right away, And usually a reel is anywhere from, 5 minutes to 15 minutes, depending on how detailed you want to go. I think, the 4-minute, 3-minute portfolio reel is a good starting point, and then you can have the longer pieces that people can reference if they really want to investigate what you can do, that kind of stuff. So like there's a 4-minute video on the homepage of my video or my personal website, jimdiazaudio.com, and you can see some of my work there. And there's a portfolio page where there's more, like there's some commercials that I've done and other elaborate game work that's not just kind of snippets or whatever. They're a little more spotlight on certain games. So, but yeah, I find that really helps. And then, having a good resume that, is legible and depicts what experience you do have. And that has helped me out quite a bit too.
Absolutely. That's great. Great advice. So one question that I was curious about when it comes to the sound design thing is that, I have a lot of background in music, and as do you and most of the people listening to this. And there are people who are thinking to themselves, like, I don't even know how to mic up an acoustic guitar or a drum kit, that kind of thing. And then here you are in the sound design world recording non-musical instruments, essentially, like there's a photo of you on your website. I think it's you taking a sledgehammer to a car and recording that. And it's like, I was thinking like, like what's the best mic positioning for that? Like, do you have something close mic? Does it distance? Like all these kind of things. So I imagine that there's like a bit of a learning curve to finding these optimal mic positions for these inanimate objects. And then there's probably a lot of cases too where you only get one chance to record the sound. If a car's exploding or something like that, like, you can't mess it up. So how do you go about like approaching that side of it?
Wow, that some of my favorite times of doing any work is doing field recording. So, I've recorded weapons. The picture you're talking about, I was hitting cars because I was working on Iron Man 2 video game, and we needed a lot of Iron Man hitting robots and stuff, and so that was a lot of fun. So we went out to an auto dismantler, and I got to swing a sledgehammer and beat on some cars, or record the car crusher crushing a car. Really, it's half of it is experimentation. You have an idea, but when you're on location and you don't know, what you're going to get or how you're going to get it, it's you got to have, good phones so you can hear what you're recording. I don't know if that shot has me headphones or not, but I'm sure we did like a test, run where I was like, okay, what's this going to sound like? In that case, I was using a Sennheiser shotgun mic that was, very, very tight. We didn't want a lot of, it had to have a lot of rejection because there was a lot of stuff, and you had a right coat on it because there was lots of wind and stuff. So having good mics, some of what we recorded on those field sessions were contact mics, for pounding on things and that kind of stuff. A lot of it is experimentation. If the more tracks you have, the better that if you can record. I was carrying my Pro Tools rig around with me. I had a portable, with the Inbox 2 Pro, and so I could have multiple lines if I needed to. When we did weapons recordings, we had so many different perspectives going. We had a variety of machines recording. We had a DAT recorder. We had a Pro Tools rig with the 002, and then we had somebody on a Nagra. We had a wide variety of mics and placements. I think we were recording probably 12 channels at a time on that. It was like doing a big, drum kit kind of thing. So we would have like close mics and, and distance mics and medium, especially for game work, you want that kind of, you need to think about what the perspective is going to be, when you're playing black, much like when, like a drum kit kind of situation where you got room mics and you've got, close mics and, where's the sound for that particular song going to be from, right? So again, if something's going to be, 5 to 10 feet away, then you kind of want to record it from that, depending on what mic you're using and all that kind of stuff too. Because I've done Foley inside, doing field recording and, okay, those are your battling elements and stuff. But if you're in a closed studio and you have a variety of mics you can choose from to record Foley, then you can get multiple perspectives from that as well. And so, it depends on what the perspective of the game is going to be, and we can, cut the content as needed depending on what sounds best and what suits it best. And a lot of times, like with the weapons that we recorded, we ended up supplementing a lot of that stuff with other elements, whether it's like an LFE kind of thump, a synthesized kind of thing or whatever. But there's a lot of ways you can approach it. But it as with anything recording, experimentation is key. And then, once you do find that sweet spot, okay, this is where we're going to do this particular element from, and you kind of stick with that. Yeah.
And I imagine things like phasing and all that kind of stuff, you're still having to factor all of that kind of stuff into it too.
Yeah. You do, but again, if something's taking things out, you remove that element of it or whatever. But or you can just physically align things or whatever in your DAW track like you would with mic and a DI or whatever. So
yeah. And I love, too, that you mentioned that you were in that example on your website where you're hitting the car, that it was for Iron Man. And, that's part of the thing that I love about sound design is that a lot of the sounds that we hear in a video game or that we see in a movie, it's, not what you think it is. It's like...
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I remember hearing that, with a lot of people would use, they'll break celery for bones and stuff like that, and to get that bone simulation sound, and it's that's such a cool thing, and to me, I imagine that that's just something you learn over time, like the tricks of the trade, or maybe there's someone's got some sort of industry bible of here are the sounds to go to for for this sound.
It all started with Jack Foley 100 years ago, or whatever, But yeah, there are certain things that, I know this is effective. If I take a wet chamois and I hit it against whatever, that's going to sound like a really impactful hit or whatever. Again, celery with bones or corn chips, or to create the sound of snow, you'll take a bunch of cornstarch and, so I did a bunch of cornstarch footsteps for, that first game I was working on. And so you learn little tricks like that. And, YouTube is great for stuff like that now because you can go see, there's all kinds of videos from Ben Burtt, the guy who was the sound designer on all the Star Wars films and the Indiana Jones films. And he is just a font of information on things that, one thing I like about him and he was been obviously I've worked in Star Wars games, he's had a particular influence on me, but he always tried to have an element of organic sound with synthetic sound that gives it that kind of real world weight. And then he would re-record things to, worldize them is what he called it. So he would run something through a speaker and then record the speaker sound to give it that sound. Like a lot of the voices for the robots or the androids in the Star Wars films were done that way. So to give them kind of a sense of being within a space rather than just having that synthetic, lack of dimension, instead of just running something through, a plug-in or something, you have that kind of, real world, sense of actually being something real. And so that was, he was a great, influence on me just listening to, and because I got to use and listen to his content, in the raw form and put it in our sound library at LucasArts. It's interesting to listen to that stuff, we would get, and even in the voiceover stuff, so all the Jawa voices or the Ewok voices, you listen to that stuff. It's wow, that's, it's pitched up or whatever. Or then he would have some mechanism that, when the Millennium Falcon fails to he's got this grind, and it's some machine where he actually spun a crank and it made all this kind of whiny gear sounds. And it's oh man, that's really cool. So, there's definitely, there are guides, this sounds like this, or if you want, but again, it comes down to experimenting, I saw a video of a guy using a feather duster to make bird sounds, and he was hitting the feather duster in his hand to make the flapping sounds. Oh, that's really cool. I never would have thought of that. I've got a set of sound design bird flaps, which is a guy flipping a wallet up and down, it's really, what do you think it should sound like? And if the real thing doesn't sound like it, what's what can I make sound like that?
I love that. It's such a creative field, and I think that's just it's not just being an audio engineer at that point. It's really being an artist and creating these sounds that are just that sound like other things.
Right,
just thinking outside of the box.
And that's the way I think about it. To me, it is an art. It's an art form. What I do is not different than somebody using paints or colors. I use colors. I use different colors. I use sound colors. And this is this is an element. I think in terms of elements of things. Okay, well, I need it to be this way in the low frequency, or I need this to be this way in the mid frequency, or I need this kind of flap, or I need this kind of punch, or whatever. And don't get me wrong. I create a lot of stuff, but I also use a lot of commercial content too. So a lot of sound ideas, Hollywood Edge kind of stuff. I have a lot of those. I've got like 3 terabytes of content in my personal sound library. So there's a wide variety of commercially rated content. But you mix and match. You create something synthetic and you put it with something that already exists from and it changes that thing into something else. And it really is working. And I work a lot with the visual artists. Because what I want my aesthetic to match, my sonic aesthetic to match the visuals, right? And so a lot of it was like, okay, create a sound, talk to the artist. Is this what you think this sounds like? Or does this, I'll get something, I'll make it, turn it into the game, somebody will play it, and I'll say, yeah, this isn't really working for me. And when I was young in my career, I would get, but I did this because of that, and and this is why it's the best sound for this. And then I just realized, no, it's not my thing. It's a collaborative thing. So, it's not working for him. Okay. I know enough now that I can just make another sound and, ask them what they'd like or what they don't like, and then create something else that will be more suitable or more to their liking or whatever. So, being able to not be possessive of your own, designs that, it's just not worth it. You're good enough. You can create something else, mm-hmm. And, kind of an interesting, connection with music, watching the Beatles Get Back documentary, they weren't precious about anything. And that's, kind of a good, it's not where the idea comes from. It's the best idea, and, so it's really kind of in having that mentality of, you can't be married to your creations. It's got to be, okay, if this doesn't work, let's find something that does, so being flexible is really, really helpful. I mean, it keep you jobs and get you other jobs, being able to, be flexible and be able to, respond on the fly to, the producer doesn't like the way this sounds. Can we fix it? Yes. Okay. So.
Yeah, I love that, man. That's great. Now, speaking of like creating realism with sound effects, that kind of segues into where you're at now and with what you're doing with spatial to some degree. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. Like, what is spatial and why should people know about this? Loaded question, I know.
No, it's great. We just had our big coming out at South by Southwest. I was there for about a week, and we had a great installation set up where people could come experience spatial firsthand. And we were working with a variety of partners that would, there was a tent next to us by a company called Meow Wolf, and they had all these little art installation islands in this tent. And our software was doing all of the audio for their presentation. So one of my jobs at our demo space was, to give people the overview of what spatial is and how it works. So basically, we have 3 pieces of software. The foundation is our real-time 3D audio immersive engine. It's real time. That's called Spatial Reality, and that is usually living on a host machine, and we use Mac Minis for our hosts, and that connects to an audio interface, which connects to your speakers. And so the idea is you can have as many speakers as you want, or as few as you need. More is better, of course. But the idea is that we're getting away from the sweet spot and the idea of a fixed listening position, right? So we're democratizing audio essentially. So it's more of a encompassing immersive experience.
It's like an interactive surround sound or something like that, right?
It can be interactive, sure. We have events, triggerable events, and we can, there's all kinds of ways that we can trigger things and all that. So, but the idea is you measure your speakers in the physical space, you input that data in the form of an XYZ coordinate system into our software that will create a speaker map, which will create like an Unreal or Unity kind of 3D visual map. And where you see that is in our composition software, which is called Spatial Studio. And that's where I do my work. And that is literally, it's a 3D map of whatever space you're connected to at the time. So like right here in my office, I've got like a 15.1 system going right now. So I've got 4 speakers on my floor, 4 speakers on my ceiling, and then like a 7.1 around me. So And then I can switch between my Pro Tools and my spatial rig. So anyway, so I get back to Studio. So you get your sound files, you import them into the Studio app. They become objects, and they're converted. Right now, we're using an Ogg Opus codec for playback. So you get your objects, you put them in your scene, and then objects can be either a point source or a sized object. So you can take the object and make it as big or as small as you want it to be. And one of the cool things about it is it's a scalable system. So I'm creating in a 10 by 10 space, but you want the playback to be in like a 25 or 100 by 100, whatever it needs. Everything will scale accordingly because it knows that based upon whatever comparative data, like my room was like this, but if it scales up, it's going to play. And when you look at it on the canvas, it looks exactly the same. And so it's a really, but if you want something to be not scaled, you can disable the scaling. So if you got like a motorcycle or something to ride through your area, your space, you create a motorcycle sized object, you disable the scaling, and it will always be that size regardless of where you're on. So so it's very similar to video games. So we're like my first focus was creating what we call soundscapes, which are virtual environments. One of our taglines is transform your space. So we are taking indoor spaces and making them sound like outdoors, and vice versa. Or you can take an existing outdoor space and it's somebody's backyard. Let's turn it into a jungle. Let's turn it into a forest or whatever. And here's a door, and we can change it. Oh, now it's nighttime. So instead of having birds and whatever, you're hearing frogs and and predators or whatever running around. And so all of the objects can be animatable. So we've got a motion path system. So you create a path around it, which either it can be point to point, or it can be meandering, whatever you want. And you can have sounds play and move across the space. Or in some cases, like when I'm doing a virtual environment, I'll say I want a bird, or a type of bird, right? So I'll create a pool of sounds, video game kind of production, a pool of sounds to draw from, and then I'll create a motion path. And so this bird group will fly around our space based upon whatever motion path. And the motion path can be independent of the sounds themselves. So the motion path can be defined by a specific length of time, and then it will loop indefinitely. And then that object will move around that motion path and then randomly play based on whatever data I put in. So, between 2 and 25 seconds, it's going to randomly play from one of these pool of bird sounds. And so it will, randomly pick, I'm going to play this one. And next 10 to 20 or 10, 2 to 25 seconds. And where it is along the path is where it will play back within the space. So, there's really, and then we can have what we call triggerable events, and they can be as simple or as complex as you want them to be, because everything is all object based. You can create these complex events that happen over time or whatever. I mean, there's no limit to how we can manually trigger. We've got an app called Studio or Spatial Control, which is on your phone, and that's what you use to populate your space with scenes and whatnot. And those scenes are also downloadable if you're working in Studio, so you want to see how we do things, and maybe you can come up with a way to do things better or whatever. So that's essentially it. It's a real-time 3D immersive engine. It's like, I call it Atmos on steroids, because it's really, it's blowing the lid off of the fixed listening position, and there's no sweet spot essentially. And it's very, and the software is free. You can use your go to spatialinc.com, create an account, you download Studio, you can start making scenes today. And getting set up with deployment is another thing, and you can all do that through the phone. You can calibrate through your phone. The biggest difference in calibration between say my Pro Tools rig and my spatial rig, I kind of follow the Bobcat's kind of 83 per satellite from my listening position, and then whatever minus 6 or whatever it is for the subwoofer. Same kind of deal. Instead of gearing towards a sweet spot for spatial, what we do is a fixed distance. So I will take like a pointer, and from 1 foot I will take a measurement from a speaker, and then whatever our target is, whether it's 86 or 90 or whatever we want it to play back, then we'll do a -6 for the subwoofers off of that. And it's all location based, so because it's a 3D map, the sounds move across. We have multiple subwoofers set up so that if there's something that has a low frequency, it's going to go to the nearest subwoofer. And we've got bass management, all that kind of stuff, so you can assign sounds to be either default, which sends full frequency to the subs, or you can do LF only, or you can do no LF. So like these burn sounds, I turn off the low frequency. It doesn't need to go to the subwoofer. But I've got thunder that plays in the same scene, and I want all that to go to, so I got elements that just go to the subwoofer, and I got other elements that go to the satellites as well. So it's really, it's a very fluid system, and it's especially if you've got some kind of video game or, interactive design. One of our goals is to, get into like theme park attractions and that kind of stuff. And we're partnered with a bunch of people. But the idea is that, you can get in and jump in and start creating scenes pretty easily right away. And there's a little bit of a learning curve, but if you've worked in game software, especially, it's pretty intuitive.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, like, this is not in any way connected to like Apple's spatial audio.
No,
right?
that's something different that came out. I mean, we'd already been in business for a few years by the time that was announced. So I don't know how long that was in development. We do have people from Apple on our team. One of our co-founders was at Apple for a while, and he was one of the designers of the Apple TV. And our other co-founder was a guy who was at Nest for a little while. And so all these guys, they're heavy hitters. They've got, dozens of patents to their names, and we've got patents already for our software, and some pending. So it's just a really interesting kind of it all spawned from our primary founder, who wanted a theme park experience in his backyard. He was very successful, and he just he's a real big Disney and Star Wars nut, and so the first thing was kind of creating these virtual environments in his yard, and then which was done, using spreadsheets and stuff. And from that, they decided to make it a company, and now we've got, all this really cool software that I get to play with and, get to tell people about, So.
That's amazing. So then what applications do you see being used for spatial? Like,
we have a wide variety of partners already. So like one company organization we're hooked up with is National Geographic. And so at their museum in Washington, D.C. right now, they've got an exhibit about Mount Everest. And as you enter the exhibit, there are 4 large screens, 2 on either side of you as you walk in, and then our sound system is running the sound for that. And that's a video presentation that lasts for about 7 minutes, and it loops continually all day. And it's Mount Everest. You're up on the mountain. People are being flown in by helicopter. You see and hear the helicopters come overhead. You got Sherpas schlepping gear up and down the mountain. Scientists doing weather checks and ice checks, and a big storm comes in and whips the tents around, and it's a pretty immersive experience just coming in there and seeing that. And then you can walk through the other part of the exhibit where they actually have artifacts from some of the excursions there and stuff. But that's one of our partners. We are also partnered with a company out of Georgia called Wellstar. They are a health and wellness company, and they've set up a bunch of recovery and wellness rooms. And so basically the idea is that you go in, one of their staff, they're fatigued from being a nurse or whatever with all this COVID craziness, and they go into this, this relaxing space and sit in a nice comfy, massage chair or whatever. And it's like, I'm going to listen to the beach today, and I'm going to listen to it for 15 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever. Or I'm going to go to the rainy forest or wherever you're going to go. To just kind of recharge your batteries and that kind of thing. And then there's also some sonic treatments called ABS, Auditory Beat System or something like that. And basically it's like a pulsing kind of, sound, usually at a low frequency, but it's mixed in with the nature stuff. And it, can help people with issues such as anxiety or depression or just a variety of things that you can be treated for, anxiety, depression. What else I'm missing one. Anyway. Sleep, yeah, oh yeah, for sure. But those are more nature-centric kind of things. But eventually we'd like to get into things like theme parks. We're working with retail companies so that some poor kid working at a mall store has to listen to the same hour of music all day long or whatever. Something like this, you can go in, if you're selling shoes, you can be in the middle of the Oakland Arena where the Warriors are playing some opponent, and you can hear the basketball players running up and down either side of you, and they take a shot and the crowd goes crazy, and you hear the PA above you and the announcements and the music and everything, and somebody picks up a shoe because they're interested in buying a shoe. The crowd goes crazy, and then the employee knows to go over to talk to this guy about selling the shoe or whatever. So yeah. There's all kinds of applications. Hospitality, you go to a resort, say in Hawaii, the beach isn't right up next to the resort, so you don't hear it in the lobby. But hey, we can create one and put it in the lobby. So as you come in, you're not just, listening to people hustling and bustling trying to get to their room. You can actually get in this nice, relaxing kind of,
That's super cool.
Yeah. So, and then again, like I said, this, this art installation thing that we were working with Meow Wolf, each island, their art installation had an ambient element, and then the overarching the entire space had some kind of stuff like that. So it's really a fluid system, and there's no real limit to the applications. We've had all kinds of ideas thrown at us in terms of what we could use our software for.
That's amazing. Yeah, I could definitely see a lot of uses for it. Do you think that, it sounds like a lot of this stuff right now is taking something that's maybe pre-recorded and then, and putting it into this software and, that maps it out. Do you think that it'll ever get to the point where it could possibly be integrated with some sort of live thing? You mentioning the example of the shoe store and having the basketball arena around you. I was just thinking how cool would it be to be watching some sports on TV and feel like you're at the game and sitting in a seat, right? That'd be incredible.
It would be. Yeah. Definitely. We can already do live streaming. So, some of our customers are in luxury homes, high-end luxury homes, and so we'll take whatever service they have, Spotify or Sonos or whatever they connect to for their streaming service of choice, and then we create a scene that will just basically allow for the streaming of the music that way. So we're going to try and leverage that. That's an AES 67 kind of protocol right now, and there's some latency involved with that we're kind of working on trying to reduce. But you know how digital audio works. There needs to be a buffer and something like that. So getting things to be in a live environment, which was a hot topic, especially at South by Southwest, because bands were coming in. I was lucky enough to create some music scenes for a band called Argonaut and Wasp, who graciously gave us their stems to work with, and it was such a pleasure to create these spatialized versions of these songs, that are funneled through into a stereo pair, and then suddenly you listen to it in an open environment. It's like, oh my God, this is just a different way to listen to music, and it's the same song, but it just gives you a different presentation format. So, ultimately, we've talked about trying to do venues. So we're actually working with some venue partners right now. We're working with the Chicago Cubs and the Boston Red Sox, and there's another team that I'm forgetting. But basically, they want us to install systems in their stadiums and either have a virtual stadium environment or, something else. I'm not sure what it's going to be. But, there's a lot of really cool, potential live applications. One of the bands, somebody from a band that came in to talk to us at South by, they were like, oh, it'd be great if we could give everybody a different perspective or whatever. Or, if you're sitting there watching the band, you can, depending on where you're sitting in the venue, will change how you're getting the mix or whatever, And there's also a headphone component we're working on as well. So it would be more like the Apple spatial audio, but right now it's only used for previewing in our studio app. And basically what you do is you have a little guy, a bust of a head, and you can move him throughout the space that you're connected to. So it's really, it's replicating the space with the headphones. So you can move him around the space and say, oh, this is what it sounds like over here. And you can
Very
do
cool.
things that way. Yeah.
Do you need to have because I know with Atmos, obviously there's it's a lot of speakers that are involved in setting this up, right? And like you said, this is scalable. Do you need consistency between all the speakers? Is that ideal? Is it can you just throw together any sort of configuration to make it work?
Yeah, we can use a variety of speakers. So even in our installation, when we were doing our demos, we had 3 different versions of speakers that we were running. As long as you have a consistent output, for our big space, we tune those to, I think, 96 dB at 1 foot, right? So every speaker output 96 dB at 1 foot away, essentially, with a -6. So the subs were at 90. So that's really what's important with us is making sure that you've got that equal output from all speakers, and that will give you the best presentation and simulate the space better when you're designing in studio, so that you get expected playback, and you can hear it in real time, because when you can actually manipulate objects and play in real time as you're moving around the space, and I need it to be more this or less that or whatever. So
that's very cool, man. Jim, I mean, I could talk your ear off about this stuff all day. I just find it so fascinating, but I don't want to take up too much more of your day here, so we should probably start to wrap up. But man, this has just been incredible, and I think this is definitely an area that we haven't talked about on the podcast before, so I'm sure people are going to find this super fascinating. And
right on. And we really want to get people using our software. So please, it's free. Try it out. we are Mac based, so if you're using a PC, sorry, we're not, developing for that. Maybe in the future, I don't know. That's not my call. I'm a Mac guy already, so it's not that big a deal. And again, the biggest inhibitor about working with Atmos is having to, not, in addition to spending thousands and thousands of dollars on a nice Pro Tools rig, you've got to spend another, 6K or whatever just to have a renderer. And that's the difference between us and Atmos is, Atmos is a rendered, final product. It's for linear media. It's made for film and that kind of thing. And this is open-ended. There is no it's a real-time render, so we're not bouncing anything out. This is just a live environment that is actually playing 24/7. And, with the use of our control app, you can switch between scenes seamlessly and, we can create complicated scenes. So like our demo scene had a bunch of sub-scenes in it, and then we just triggered events and and we can tie in with video and we can tie in with lighting so that the lights can change when you change, when you have an event happen or, an image will change on the screen or whatever. It's very fluid. It's, we've got all kinds of triggers. We can do motion sensor triggers. We've got one thing where we've got a camera that can actually count the number of people that walk into a space, assign them an ID, and if there's a triggerable zone, you have a trigger, I have a trigger, you walk into that zone, it plays one thing, I walk into the zone, it plays something else.
Wow.
So there's all kinds of things that we can do. And again, those are simple events. That's really just like just playing one song. But again, I've created events that could be, as long as 20 to 30 seconds, but it would be like, like a little vignette of a little audio play or whatever. There's so many things that we can do with this. But the idea is that, it's happening in real time and, it's not a plug-in, it's a standalone thing. And so I do a lot of prep work and, I do my pre-production in Pro Tools, and then I can run my Pro Tools rig through the exact same speakers that I'm running here. But when I'm putting it in studio, it's going to be completely different. It's going to be, okay, now it's an object. Now I'm going to place it within the space, and then let the real time magic happen. And it's a lot of fun. And again, I did 3 mixes for this band, Audio Argonaut and Wasp, and their stems were really, really clean. It was a lot of fun to just kind of like, I kind of did an outward in kind of thing, so all the drum elements are kind of like on the outer part of the space, and then lead vocals are like at ear level, and then we've got bass on the ground, and synthesizers and backing vocals flying around through the air. It's just, so much fun. Horn stabs, oh, they're over here, now they're over there. The guitar moves around and stuff. It's just, it's opening up music, and as somebody who's been making music for most of my life and, just to get away from the entire, stereo pair or whatever. Don't get me wrong. Headphones, God, I love the Beatles. I love Pink Floyd, listening to the stuff on the headphones. It's great. Now we can take it, put it in a real space, and then, oh my God, it's a totally different experience. So.
That's amazing. Yeah, I there's so many things that you could apply this to now that I'm thinking about it. And
it really is.
You could bring back old artists and have like virtual concerts and like do all sorts of stuff.
I would love nothing more to get, there's some illegal, bootlegs of multi-track transfers that I'm sure a lot of your audience may know about, from bands like Queen and whomever. But to be able to get that content and listen to it spatialized, it's transformative. It really is. To have Freddie Mercury, right here in my room, and the pianos are over here, or whatever. It's really fun. Again, that's not for public use. but yeah, I can take my band stuff or, my little cover band that we play, little festivals around here, and I can do that stuff or whatever. I definitely want to, it was nice of this band to let us do their, use their stuff for our examples. And they were actually playing at South by as well. And so one of the guys came by and listened to it, and he was just blown away. He just, it's so different. It's just so different. And that's the thing. It's, we're blowing the lid off of that fixed system kind of thing. It's really cool. Really,
it's incredible.
Technology. Yeah,
incredible, man. Yeah, I definitely can't wait to check it out myself and hopefully find a space that's set up for it.
Yeah. Oh, you can do it wherever you are, man.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah.
And again, the only real inhibitor right now, something we're working on, is the fact that we need a host machine versus a production machine. So, I've got a Mac Mini that's connected to my Tascam, right? We're using Dante, so it's easy to create, you can align your channels however you want. But the important part is to have the measurements of the speakers in the physical space so that when you have your space map that you work in, it's playing out of the proper, channel. And we don't think of it in channels. We think of it as this 3D space. So when an object is over here, it's going to play out of these speakers. And, and we have little all kinds of tools for, we've got this thing called spread where you can like actually take it's kind of like an outer radius when I was talking about the
video games,
the game stuff. It's similar to that. That's still kind of in development. But again, because the objects can be sized, right? So if I got an object and it's over, 2 or 3 speakers, then it's automatically attenuated. So instead of summing, right, all of those sounds out of, it's summing to a 1 basically, so that, no matter what, if it's a solo object on 1 speaker, that's a 1, and if it's encompassing 3 speakers, the numbers will, make it to be just the same 1. So it's a very smart system. It's very intuitive, and it's a lot of fun to use.
Very cool, man. I'm super like excited about all the stuff we talked about here today. It's just like
right on.
It's exciting stuff. It's fun, and I think it's just something different that we haven't really talked about on the podcast. So, man, thank you for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, man. It's always a good pleasure talking to you. We've talked before. We did this, and you're a good guy. I like what you're doing, and you helped me too. You gave me some really cool tips. It's like because I don't work in music. I started out in music, but my professional career has usually been sound effects, and so there's some techniques in music that I can always. Everybody, it's a journey. It's not you don't really arrive. And so I thank you for whatever you've helped me with. So thank you.
Thank you. Anytime, man. If people want to learn more about you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, my personal website is jimdiazaudio.com, and that has, my portfolio, my resume and stuff. And then to find out about Spatial, it's spatialinc.com, Spatial, SPATIALINC.com. And you can, again, create your own account, download Spatial Studio today, and just start creating your content and creating your scenes. And again, you can download some shared scenes that we have loaded in the app, and it's figure out how we're doing things and see what we're doing and see how things work. And yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Amazing. So that was my conversation with Jim Diaz, and that was so fun and so interesting. And I just think it's so cool that, this is an industry that a lot of people don't really know about. And obviously on this podcast, we talk a lot about music production, but there are a lot of other career paths when it comes to audio production, and I think it's worth knowing about them. So I'm so glad that Jim came on here and that he was able to talk about all of the cool stuff that he's done in the video game industry, and also all of the cool stuff that he's working on right now with Spatial. And I think that that's going to be a technology that just takes off and takes on a whole new life, because there are definitely a lot of possibilities for this immersive audio experience. And with some of the things that he was talking about as far as how they plan to use it and make things, bring it into theme parks and stores and stuff like that, I think that that's just going to create a really cool environment. And I think it's going to make people appreciate audio even further. And that's really important. So yeah, Jim, if you're listening to this, thanks again for being on. This was amazing, and we'll have to have you back on at some point and talk about all the other cool stuff that you're working on, because I know there's a lot on your plate. So I hope that you, the listener, found this interesting and that you found this very helpful. And I know that there's a lot of people that listen to this podcast that have been thinking about getting into the video game industry or the sound design industry. And so definitely go back and listen to this episode if you want a little bit more insight into what goes into this industry and how to prepare for it. I think Jim shared some great advice here. And if you enjoyed that episode, definitely make sure to subscribe to the podcast. That way you're notified about all new episodes as they go live each and every Wednesday morning. And we've got lots of other great interviews lined up and lots of other cool topics that we're going to discuss, much like this. And I think you're going to really find them very fascinating. So once again, make sure to subscribe to this podcast, and also make sure to visit MasterYourMix.com. That is a website where I help out musicians with creating pro sounding mixes from their home studios. And on the website, we've got tons of great resources designed to help make that process of mixing and recording your music super easy. And one resource that you definitely want to check out is called The Mixing Mindset. And that is a book where I break down the step-by-step process for mixing your music from home, covering everything from the tools that you need to know, what to be listening out for, how to dial in settings. That way you have a very clear path of what to do when it comes to your mixes, and you're not feeling scatterbrained throughout that process. Instead, you have a very clear focus, and this book will help guide you from beginning to end so that you can make mixes that sound as good as your favorite recordings. So once again, that's called The Mixing Mindset, and that's available at MasterYourMix.com. And that is it for this episode. Thank you so much for sticking around to the very end. Looking forward to chatting with you in the next one. We'll talk soon. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. To have your questions answered, submit your questions to questions@masteryourmix.com. Please go to iTunes and subscribe and leave a review. And for more information on how you can improve your mixes, visit masteryourmix.com.